"Hello! Below there!" When he heard a voice thus calling to him, the man was standing at the door of his signal box, with a flag in his hand, furled round its short pole. One would have thought, considering the nature of the ground, that he could not have mistaken from what direction the voice came. But instead of looking up to where I stood on the top of the steep cutting, high over his head, he turned himself about and looked down the railway line. There was something remarkable in his manner of doing so, though I could not for my life have said what. But I do know it was remarkable enough to notice, even though he was far down in the deep cutting. High above him, I was in the glow of an angry sunset, so I had to shade my eyes with my hand before I could see him at all. "Hello! Below!" From looking down the line, he turned himself around. Then, raising his eyes, he saw me above him. "Is there any path by which I can come down and speak to you?" He looked up at me without replying. Just then there came a vibration in the earth, quickly changing into a violent rumbling, and an oncoming rush of air which caused me to step back as though it might draw me down. When the steam from this express train had passed over me, I looked down again and saw him refurling the flag he had held while the train went by. I repeated my question about a possible way down. After a pause, he motioned with his rolled-up flag towards a point some 200 or 300 yards along from me. I called down to him, "Thank you," and made for that point. I found a rough, zigzag, descending path. The cutting was extremely deep and precipitous. It had been cut through a kind of clammy stone, and it became oozier and wetter the further down I went. When I was far enough down the steep path, I saw that the man was standing between the rails, where the train had just passed, as if he were waiting for me to appear. His attitude was one of such watchfulness that I stopped a moment, wondering at it. I continued my downward scramble, and stepping out onto the level of the track and drawing nearer to him, I saw he was a dark, sallow man with a dark beard and heavy eyebrows. His post was in as solitary and dismal a place as ever I saw. On either side, a dripping wet wall of jagged stone excluding all view but a strip of sky. The view one way, only the steep sides of the cutting into the distance. The shorter view in the other direction, ending in a gloomy red tunnel and the entrance to a forbidding black tunnel. So little sunlight ever found its way down to this spot that it had an earthy, deadly smell, and so much cold wind rushed through it that it struck me with a chill, as if I had left the natural world behind. The man remained stock still until I was near enough to have touched him. Then, without removing his eyes from mine, he stepped back a pace. "This was a lonely post to occupy," I said, "and it had riveted my attention when I looked down from up yonder. A visitor was a rarity, I should suppose. Not an unwelcome rarity, I hoped." To such effect I spoke to him, but I'm far from sure of the actual words I used, for, apart from the fact I'm never very comfortable in opening a conversation, there was something in this man that daunted me. He directed a most curious look towards the red light near the tunnel's mouth, as if something were wrong with it, and then he looked at me. I asked if that light was part of his charge, was it not? He answered in a low voice, "Don't you know it is?" An alarming thought came into my mind as I perused the fixed eyes and the melancholy face, that this was a spirit, not a man. But I detected in his eyes some genuine fear of me. "You look at me," I said, forcing a smile, "as if you had a dread of me." "I was wondering," he returned, "whether I had seen you before." "Where?" He pointed to the red signal light he had just looked at. "There?" I said. Intently watchful of me, he replied, but without sound, "Yes." "My good fellow, what should I be doing there? However, be that as it may, I never was there, you may swear." "I think I may," he replied. "Yes, I'm sure I may." His manner began to clear. He replied to my remarks with readiness and in well-chosen words. Had he much to do there? Yes, that was to say, he had enough responsibility to bear, but exactfulness and watchfulness was what was required of him, and of actual work, manual labour, he had next to none. To change that signal, to trim those lights, and to turn this iron handle now and then, was all he had to do. Regarding those many long and lonely hours of which I seemed to make so much, he could only say that the routine of his life had shaped itself that way, and he had grown used to it. Was it necessary for him when on duty always to remain in that channel of damp air? And could he never rise into the sunshine from between those high stone walls? Why, that depended upon times and circumstances. Under some conditions there'd be less upon the line than others. Same held good for certain hours of the day and night. In bright weather he did sometimes try to get a little above these lower shadows, but being at all times liable to be called by his electric bell, and then listening for it with redoubled anxiety, his relief was less than one might think. He took me into his signal box, where there was a fire, a desk for an official book in which he had to make certain entries, a telegraph instrument with its dial face and needles, and the little bell of which he had spoken. I remarked that he spoke like someone quite well educated. He said he had been, when much younger, a student of natural philosophy and had attended lectures, but he had run wild, misused his opportunities, gone down, and had never risen again. He had no complaint about that. He had made his bed, he said, and he lay on it. It was far too late to make another. All of this he said in a quiet manner, with his grave, dark expression divided between me and the fire. He threw in the word "sir" from time to time, as though to have me understand that he claimed to be nothing more than what I found him. He was several times interrupted by the little bell, and had to read off messages and send replies. Once he had to stand outside the door and display a flag as a train passed and make some verbal communication to the driver. In the carrying out of his duties he was remarkably exact and vigilant, instantly breaking off any conversation and remaining silent until he had done what had to be done. In a word, I should have set this man down as one of the safest men to be employed in that capacity, except that twice while he was speaking to me, he broke off with a sudden pallor, turned his face towards the little bell when it did not ring, opened the door of the hut and looked out towards the red signal light near the mouth of the tunnel. On both occasions he came back to the fire with the strange look upon him which I had noticed when I first saw him from afar. I said, when I rose to leave him, "You almost make me think I have met with a contented man." I confess that I said it to lead him on. "I believe I used to be," he replied, in the low voice which he had first spoken. "But I am troubled, sir. I am troubled." He would have taken those words back if he could, but he had said them, and I took them up quickly. "With what? What is your trouble?" "It is very difficult to impart, sir. It is very, very difficult to speak of. If ever you make me another visit, I will try to tell you. But I expressly intend to make you another visit. Say, when shall it be? I go off early in the morning, and I shall be back on again at 10 tomorrow night, sir. I will come at 11. He thanked me, and went out at the door with me. I'll show my white light, sir, he said, till you have found a way up. When you have found it, don't call out, and when you're at the top, don't call out. His manner seemed to make the place feel colder to me, but I said no more than, very well, and when you come down tomorrow night, don't call out. Let me ask you a parting question. What made you cry, hello, below there, tonight? Heaven knows, said I. I shouted something to that effect. Not to that effect, sir. Those were the very words. I know them well. Very well that those were my words. I said them, no doubt, because I saw you below. For no other reason. What other reason could I possibly have? You had no feeling that they were conveyed to you in any supernatural way? No. He wished me good night and held up his light. I walked by the side of the down line of the rails, with a very disagreeable sensation of a train coming behind me, until I found the path. It was easier to climb up than to descend, and I got back to my inn without any difficulty. The next night, punctual to my appointment, I reached the zigzag path as the distant clocks were striking 11. He was waiting for me at the bottom with his white lantern on. I did not call out, I said, when we came close together. May I speak now? By all means, sir. Good evening to you then, and here's my hand. Good evening, sir, and here's mine. With that, we walked side by side to his signal box, entered it, closed the door, and sat down by the fire. I've made up my mind, sir, he began, leaning forward as soon as we were seated and speaking almost in a whisper. And you shall not have to ask me twice what troubles me. I took you for someone else yesterday evening. That troubles me. That mistake? No, that's someone else. Who is it? I don't know. Like me? I don't know. I never saw the face. The left arm is across the face, and the right arm is waved, violently waved, like this. I followed his action with my eyes, and it was the action of an arm gesticulating with the utmost passion and vehemence, as if to say, for God's sake, clear the way. One moonlight night, said the man, I was sitting here when I heard a voice cry, hello, below there. I started up, looked from that door, and saw this someone else standing by the red light near the tunnel, waving as I just showed you. The voice seemed hoarse with shouting, and it cried, look out, and then again, hello, below there, look out. I picked up my lamp, turned it to red, and ran towards the figure, calling, what's wrong? What has happened? Where? It stood just outside the blackness of the tunnel. I advanced so close up to it, I wondered at it keeping the sleeve across its eyes. I ran right up to it and had my hand stretched out to pull the sleeve away, but it was gone. Into the tunnel? No. I looked in the tunnel, a good 100 yards. Then I ran out again as faster than I'd come in, for I felt a mortal fear of the place. And then I looked all round the big red signal with my lantern, and I went up the iron ladder to the gantry on top of it, and I came down again, and I ran back here. I telegraphed both ways. An alarm has been given. Is anything wrong? The answer came back, both ways. All well. Trying to ignore the shiver in my spine, I suggested to him, this figure must be a trick of the light, deceiving his sense of sight. As to an imaginary cry, I said, do but listen for a moment to the wind in this deep cutting now, as we speak so low, and hear the wild sound it makes as it blows through the telegraph wires. That was all very well, he said, after we'd sat listening for a while, and he ought to know something of the wind and the wires. He so often passed long winter nights there alone. But he would beg to say that he had not yet finished. I asked his pardon, and he slowly added these words. 6 hours after the appearance of this figure, the dreadful accident on this line happened. And when the dead and the injured were brought out along through the tunnel, it was over the very spot where the figure had stood. A shudder crept over me, but I did my best to hide it. It was not to be denied, I said. This was a remarkable coincidence which was bound to weigh heavy on his mind. But remarkable coincidences did sometimes occur. Again, he told me he had not finished. Again, I begged his pardon for my interruptions. This, he said, glancing over his shoulder, was just a year ago. 6 or 7 months passed after the accident, when one morning, as the day was breaking, I was standing at the door and looked towards the red light, and I saw the spectre again. He stopped with a fixed look at me. Did it cry out? No. It was silent. Did it wave its arm? No. It leaned against the shaft of the light with both hands before its face, like this. Once more I followed his action with my eyes. It was the action of mourning, like something seen in stone figures on tombs. Did you go up to it? I came in and sat down, partly to collect my thoughts, partly because it had made me feel faint. When I went to the door again, daylight was above me, and the ghost was gone. But nothing followed. Nothing came of this. He tapped me on the arm with his forefinger, twice or thrice, giving a ghastly nod each time. That very day, as a train came out of the tunnel, I noticed at a carriage window on my side what looked like a confusion of hands and heads, and something waved. I saw it just in time to signal the driver, "Stop!" He shut off and put his brake on, but the train carried on past, 100 yards or more. I ran after it, and as I went along, I heard terrible screams and cries. A beautiful young lady had died suddenly in one of the compartments. She was brought in here and laid down on this very floor, between where the two of us are sitting now. Involuntarily, I pushed my chair back as I looked from the boards at which he'd pointed. True, sir, true. Precisely as it happened, I tell you. I could think of nothing to say to any purpose, and my mouth was very dry. The wind and the wires took the story up with a long lamenting wail. He continued. Now, sir, mark this, and judge how my mind is troubled. The spectre came back a week ago. Ever since, it has been there, now and again, by fits and starts, at the light, at the danger light. What does it seem to do? He repeated, and with even more passion and vehemence. That gesticulation he had shown me earlier. For God's sake, clear the way. Then he went on. I have no peace or rest for it. It calls to me, agonized for minutes at a time. Below there, look out, look out. It stands waving to me. It rings my little bell. I caught at that. Did it ring your bell yesterday evening when I was here and you went to the door? Twice. Well, I see, I said, how your imagination misleads you. My eyes were on that bell, and my ears were open to the bell, and as I live, the bell did not ring at those times. No, nor at any other time, except when it was rung by the station communicating with you. He shook his head. I've never made a mistake about that, sir. I've never confused the ghost's ring with the station master's. The ghost's ring is a strange vibration in the bell that comes from nothing else. I don't wonder that you failed to hear it. But I heard it. And did the spectre seem to be there when you looked out? It was there. Both times? Both times. I said, will you come to the door with me now and look for it now? He bit his lip, as though he was somewhat unwilling, but he arose. I opened the door and stood on the step while he stood in the doorway. There was the danger light. There was the dismal mouth of the tunnel. There were the high, wet stone walls of the cutting. There were the stars above them. Do you see it? I asked him. His eyes were prominent and strained, but no more so perhaps than my own eyes when I had looked earnestly towards the same spot. No, he answered. It's not there. We went in again, shut the door, and resumed our seats. I was thinking how best to continue when he took up the conversation in quite a matter-of-fact way. By this time you will understand, sir, what troubles me so dreadfully is, what does the spectre mean? What is it warning against? He said, with his eyes on the fire, only sometimes turning them on me. What is the danger? Where is the danger? There is danger hanging over the line somewhere. Some dreadful calamity will happen. It is not to be doubted this third time, after what has gone before. Why this cruel haunting of me? What can I do? He pulled out his handkerchief and wiped the sweat from his face. If I telegraph danger to one of the stations, on either side of me, or on both, I can give no reason for it. I would get into trouble, and it would do no good. They would think I was mad. The pain in his mind was pitiful to see. When it first stood under the danger light, why didn't it tell me where this accident was to happen, if it must happen? Why not tell me how it could be averted, if it could be averted? When on its second coming, it hit its face, why not tell me she is going to die? Make them keep her at home. If it came on those two occasions only to show me that its warnings were true, and so prepare me for the third warning, why not warn me plainly? And I, Lord help me, just a poor signalman in this solitary signal box. When I saw him in this state, I saw that for everyone's sake what I had to do was compose his mind. So I put it to him that whoever had a duty to do must do it well, and that he understood his duty, even though he did not understand these appearances. Eventually I succeeded, and he did become calmer. I left him at 2 a.m. I offered to stay the night, but he would not hear of it. That I, more than once, looked back at the red light as I climbed the pathway, and that I did not like the red light, I see no reason to conceal. Nor did I like the two sequences, the accident and the dead girl. I see no reason to conceal that either. But what ran most in my thoughts was, how ought I to act, having become the recipient of this disclosure? Next evening was a lovely evening, and I walked out early to enjoy it. The sun was not quite yet down when I crossed the field path near the top of the deep cutting. I would extend my walk for an hour, I said to myself, half an hour on, half an hour back, and then It would be time to go down and talk to the signalman again. But before pursuing my stroll, I stepped to the brink of the cutting and glanced down from the point where I had first seen him. I cannot describe the shock that struck me when, at the mouth of the tunnel, I saw the appearance of a man with his left sleeve across his eyes, desperately waving his right arm. The shock passed in a moment, for I quickly saw that this appearance of a man was a man indeed, and that there was a little group of other men standing at a short distance, to whom it seemed he was rehearsing the gesture he made. The danger signal was not lit, but against the metal frame of the signal there were some wooden supports and tarpaulin, a hasty shelter that had been thrown together. With a terrible feeling that something was wrong, with a flashing, self-reproachful fear that fatal mischief had come of my leaving the man there, I descended the steep path with all the speed I could. "What has happened?" I asked the group of men. "Signalman killed this morning, sir." "Not the man belonging to that signal box?" "Yes, sir." "Not the man I know?" "You will recognise him, sir, if you knew him," said the man who spoke for the others, solemnly raising a corner of the tarpaulin, "for his face is quite composed." How did this happen? How did it happen?" I asked, turning from one to another. "He was cut down by the train, sir. No man in England knew his work better, but somehow he weren't clear of the outer rail. It was a broad day. It struck the light. He had the lamp in his hand, and the engine come out of the tunnel. His back was towards her, and she cut him down. That man there drove the engine, sir, and he was showing us how it happened." "Show the gentleman, Tom." "Coming round the curve in the tunnel, sir," said the driver. "I saw him at the end, like as if I saw him down a perspective glass. There was no time to cut speed, and I knew him to be very careful, but he didn't seem to take heed of the whistle, so I shut it off as we were running towards him, and I called to him as loud as I could call." "What did you say?" "I said, 'Below there, hello, below there, look out, for God's sake, clear the way.'" I started. "It was dreadful, sir. I never left off calling to him. I put my arm in front of my eyes so as not to see, and I waved my other arm to the last moment, but it was no use." I shall not prolong this narrative to dwell on any one of its peculiar circumstances any more than any other, but I simply cannot explain how the warning of the engine driver included not only the words and the gestures which the unfortunate signalman had told me were haunting him, but also the very words which I had found myself calling out above the cutting. "Hello! Below there!